Welcome back, everybody. Episode 2, Season 3, Railroad Empires, how we're building them. So today we're doing something a little different. We're doing pre-recorded content. We just want to test it out and see how well it's going to work. This is our first one, so bear with us. I'm sure it's not a masterpiece or anything like that. Alright, so as you can see here, I'm basically cutting in a new turnout. Give me a hard time for using white glue. This is the reason I like it. So I just drop down a little bit of water, let it sit for a few minutes, and it comes right up easy. I can save everything. I don't have to worry about just throwing it away. If I were to use caulk or something like that, I'd probably have to just throw all that stuff away. Well, white glue, I can save it and reuse it for something else. Once I get it cut in, I just start going down. That little thing you saw there with the joiners, that was just kind of showing that I trim off the nubs on the ends of my joiners to make sure that I can get as much wiggle room as possible without bumping into the ties and, you know, pushing the ties around, things like that. Alright, so I'm getting down to the corner here. What I like to do on mine is go ahead and, if I've got the room, then I will do about half a stick of flex track straight before then get into the curve, and then I'll solder them together while it's halfway through the curve on that stick. Otherwise, if I don't have the space, I'll do like I'm doing here and just pull it off onto the workbench and solder them together on the workbench. With this particular piece, I think because I did it on the workbench instead of right on the layout, I ended up having to take out a few more ties to get it to curve around. Here, basically what we're doing is dry fitting everything back into where it needs to be. I did go ahead and make a 2-inch spacer block for myself. So we're going through, we're just making sure everything's lined up properly in a dry fit mode. I've got that all done. And then we're going to start pulling up the road bed. I'm going to use the white glue, brush it on full strength. I'm not diluting it or anything. I'll brush that down and we're going to get the road bed set. And then pin all that back down. I do pin it to a center line so that I can maintain a certain angles and everything else like that. Keep my radiuses nice. Long process here. Okay, now I got all that down, all the road beds down. Now I'm going to start brushing in more white glue to put the track down. As you can see, that white glue is more than stiff enough that it holds without the pins in, but I still go and pin it down anyway just to make sure. Don't want it to move while it's setting up. And when I work it at one stick at a time. I'm not trying to put it a whole bunch down so that it all dries up before I get down there. Alright, so we're pulling up those T-pins of that road bed that I put down already. Realized I needed to glue down the back track, so I'm going to do that first. Alright, now we're going to glue down the track to the road bed. So we've got a layer of glue on bottom, layer of glue on top. Alright, now we're pinning it all back in place. Alright, brought it around the curve and we're coming up towards the bridge area now, so things are gonna have to be put on hold until we get that done. Alright, now I'm cutting in the roadbed for that turnout. I know there's a bunch of different ways. This is just the way that I came up to do it. And it worked out okay. Took a little longer than it probably should have, but yeah, whatever. Slide the rails off to the side so you have workspace. I'm using a piece of masonite actually as kind of a straight edge. And again, gluing all that down. Put a little bit of glue on that new line there so that it would kind of hold. And now I'm using a pair of pliers to get all the rail joiners seated properly. I'm going to pin it back down for a couple hours just to make sure it doesn't move. There is no glue on. Alright, we're dropping feeders. This is the fun part. So this is actually, I know it doesn't show it in the video, but this is a lot of up and down, up and down, up and down. On this side of the layout, it's only 1 inch of foam on block risers, so it's actually was a little bit easier to deal with. I made this sled, took me about 10-15 minutes for my wiring sled. Just slapped it together with some old sheathing plywood. So I had a few places where that riser just kind of went in the wrong spot, so I had to use a drill to drill right through it. It didn't take long. It's pretty small. So what I'm doing is dropping down more than enough wire and then getting it lined up and pushing it all back in and cutting it off so I don't have a whole ton of excess underneath the layout. I'll clean up the workbench a little bit before we keep going because, you know, I'd rather you guys not see what kind of a mess I'm dealing with. But that's alright. So here you'll get a glimpse of the up and down, up and down, up and down that we're dealing with. My back was pretty sore after this. Move the camera, sorry about that. Hope you didn't get sick. So in this section I've got 5 inches of foam. You can see on the other side of the bridge just how much there is. So what I'm doing is using a bamboo skewer that I cut down the top, and I'm using that to pinch the wire to be able to pull it straight through the foam without it hanging up or anything else like that. Alright, we're doing it again. I am dropping feeders inside the rails this time. The other side I dropped them on the outside, but I wanted to see if I can make a difference in how the ballast sits and anything else like this. What I will do is pull those feeders to the outside from the inside of the rail and to get them to fold under and make a little bit better contact. Now it is soldering time. So this is kind of tedious because, again, like I said, I'm pulling them from the inside of the rail to the outside of the rail. Then I'm also putting a couple of 90-degree bends in it, one towards the rail and then one parallel to the rail, so that when I pull it down and pull it tight, it sits right on the web of the rail, and I'm soldering directly to the web of the rail. Typically I would use something as a heat sink to keep from melting the ties, but I've gotten better at my soldering, so now it's not on there very long and it hasn't melted anything yet. But if you're new to it, I would use my track gauges as my heat sinks to make sure we don't have a melting issue. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and hook those feeders up to the bus lines here. I use T-splice connectors, at least that's what I call them. What they're actually called, I'm not entirely sure. They clip onto the rail and form like a T with your wiring. So where normal people use like a suitcase connector where the wires are parallel to each other and they get clamped down, these ones actually more or less form a T. It allows me to be able to pull out the feeder if I need to a lot easier and not break the connection under the suitcase connector or anything else. I don't have to remove that piece. So basically what we're doing is we're just trimming and crimping and pulling them together, making a solid connection. I did find out though that you can use the insulated quick connectors that have the plastic outer casing with these, and it'll go in and make a great connection. So it's one solid piece. There's no metal showing or no potential for metal to show. One of the things I do for my feeders is I trim off enough wire so that I can loop it back on itself to give me a couple of connection points for the actual connector, and then I just pull it back through enough so that it hooks the little lip on the inside of the connector, and then crimp it all down nice and tight. All right, Andy, you're up, buddy.
So I've been working on these new modules, and this is one of the most outside frames for that. I'm kind of testing the spacing that I'm going to have, because I want to work on the roadbed very early on, and you'll see as I progress and as I post and kind of show off these modules in the Empire series or on our late nights, you'll see that how those modules come together and come to completion. But here I'm cutting out roadbed. So in this area, this is a 4-track yard. You'll see that in just a second. That's the empties yard for the cold loading plant that's on the adjacent module, and I'm cutting homosote, cleaning it up, and gluing down paper templates to it, which Robert turned me on to doing this one-to-one paper template stuff that I wasn't doing before. But I'm gonna cut this or glue this down in kind of a decoupage concept, which my wife showed me some of these people who were using Mod Podge to basically take paper and put it on furniture or something. So I basically coat this paper, glue it down with Mod Podge, paint on and cover it up with Mod Podge so it's kind of sealed in to the process, so any wet scenery or ballasting or whatever won't impact my paper, and the paper won't cause me a problem in the future. So here I've had to cut a few of these things apart to kind of make it work and to kind of twist turnouts and stuff. But also something to mention, I found a blade for jigsaw that's basically like a razor blade, but it's a high carbon steel razor blade, and it makes a lot less dust. I mean, it's still dust, it's homosote, so, but it's a whole lot better. And I found that arrangement. And then here, so I'm gonna glue down all this paper. I've done this on the module that you see behind me as well. I haven't started laying track on that module, but I also like to do a lot of scenery before I get too much involved in track, because my track is quite time consuming. I want to make sure that I'm going to like the scenery before I kind of go down that rabbit hole. So, and I've used a straight edge to kind of make sure some of these parts line up correctly. I do the same thing on the other. And the biggest reason that I'm building roadbed components before I get very far along on the modules, I actually lock the roadbed in and make sure everything works out right before I deal with the sub fascia and the front components of the module. This module, or this roadbed, turns, disappears, and terminates, or goes through the wall. And I'm cutting over the flex track back after you can't see it, and I'm making up a little piece to, like a half-lapped lift out section of sorts, except it's permanent in the wall. So there'll be a 2 feet, give or take, a little less than 2 feet, kind of bridged section that comes out onto this module and into the staging room that's removable because it goes through a wall. I could take that little bridge out and I could drop the staging down, or I could drop the modules down. And also I wanted the track to cross this barrier at a 90-degree angle, perpendicular to the rail travel. I really don't like cutting rails for lift outs or removable sections on some angle other than 90 degrees. I made this little contraption up with half-inch MDF and a little strip of MDF where the flex track comes off the homosote onto the MDF, has some printed circuit ties to terminate it, terminates there, the flush end, and then it drops down a half-inch so that there's like a little slot where the quote-unquote bridge track kind of drops in that spans through the wall. So now I'm starting to actually build up the splines. So on much of the remaining modules on this top level, they will just be splines and the track will be laid immediately on top. In this case where it's 4 tracks wide, so in any place where it's more than 2 tracks wide, I build a flat surface and then I put homosote sticks underneath. What I'm putting on at the moment was fiberglass tape. The stuff that they use in sheetrock, the fiberglass mesh tape. As we do some scenery, you'll see how I integrate that. And then on the outside of that, I'm capping that with 1/4-inch masonite, hardboard masonite, whatever. So it's a homosote spline and 2-inch fiberglass mesh tape that kind of mostly hangs out, and then that's kind of squeezed in between this little strip of masonite. The masonite keeps the homosote from having the tendency to sag over time, where gravity is going to take its toll, and it may have a slight sag over time, over a long enough period of time. That masonite also gives me a really solid structure for things to connect to, scenery components, etc. And that fiberglass mesh rolls over onto foam scenery so that no gap can form against the spline, or I can sew big sheet screen mesh or fiberglass mesh to it in order to make kind of hollow-core, hollow mountain scenery with screen wire and 2-part styrofoam like Robert has done. And here I'm just locking a bunch of splines in and throwing some weight on it so it'll stick there. There's a bunch of splines that go through, just gaining some strength. I mean, the individual sticks of homosote really don't have much strength. They're paper, they're 2-inch sticks. As you put, say, 3 or 4 together in a traditional spline arrangement, side by side, glued together and bend curves and stuff, they actually have quite a bit of strength. Same thing happens here.
So there you have it, folks. Thanks for joining us. Tune in next month for another episode. Hopefully it'll be better than this one, but we'll see. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Game over.